Dear friends, today we have a very famous doctor as our guest, Dr. Andrei Kurpatov. Andrei, who are you?
I am a psychiatrist and psychotherapist.
There are many like that. Still, I would like to know, in which field do you work, so our viewers can get to know you?
Psychiatry is generally split into major and minor, and I specialized in minor psychiatry from the start. These include neuroses, depressive disorders, and other borderline conditions. Well, in psychotherapy, which I practice, there are also several approaches. There is psychoanalytic, there is humanistic psychology, there is cognitive behavioral psychotherapy, and I work in the cognitive behavioral direction. But mine is more academic, because I built my systemic behavioral psychotherapy based on our domestic research. It's not like our colleagues in the West, who are engaged in behaviorism. We have our own excellent school, Sechenov, Pavlov, Ukhtomsky, Luria, Anokin, and so on. That's why we have an incredible foundation for creating our own psychotherapeutic science, which is what I do. And in this sense, I am the founder of systemic behavioral psychotherapy. In addition, I was once a healthcare organizer and worked on popularizing psychotherapeutic assistance. Because when I first started practicing, in the mid-90s, there was still no understanding that a person could have depressive disorders, neuroses, and so on. Our first order from the Ministry of Health regarding psychotherapeutic assistance was issued in 1995. And accordingly, people simply weren't ready, and I was in charge of the City Psychotherapeutic Center in St. Petersburg and was engaged in popularizing psychotherapy. So I became the author not only of monographs, which I always worked on with love, but also of popular books, which eventually led me to television. I created the first original psychological program in Russia. Then I managed the largest television production company in Russia for 7 years, and we produced programs, series, movies, and so on. Krasny Kvadrat organized Eurovision in Moscow in 2009, and since 2014, I founded the intellectual cluster Mind Games in St. Petersburg. It's a complex of buildings that houses the Higher School of Methodology, which I lead, the Academy of Meaning. This is my project for teaching thinking, and a number of other activities. Since 2019, I have been heading the Laboratory of Human Neuroscience that I created at Spurbank, where we conduct a lot of systematic research. First, in studying human interaction with the digital environment, and secondly, how a person's psyche changes in new circumstances, and what we need to take into account in order to provide the best possible assistance. I'm already in medicine. To provide services, to help clients, but it's always nice to see a doctor. Psychologists often ask me if we should call those who come to us clients. I say I don't have that problem. All of mine are patients, and I'm someone's patient too, so I like it that way.
Thank you first of all for coming. I actually have a lot of questions myself, and no matter how many questions I ask, I always get different answers. I think today I'll be able to turn to the final authority. Maybe the questions will seem simple, but our viewers helped put them together. They're interested. And the first question, by the way, is also from my patients. I've noticed that many patients, when they come in, they say, "Doctor, I have low testosterone," or "I have high prolactin." That's why I'm unhappy. And look, I'm trying to treat myself. They show me their regimens. Here I'm taking clomiphene to raise my testosterone. Here I tried injections, and it's not helping. Why is that? And you try to explain to them that, unfortunately, the cause and effect relationship isn't always connected to hormones, and it turns out the person actually has depression. But how? I have a good job, I have a good family, I don't really have any stress at work, and yet here I am. Today I said this phrase to a patient. I said that sometimes depression happens to people whose lives you envy. What's your opinion? Is it necessary to fall into depression? I mean, is it a mandatory fact that you have to have a negative, bad life to become depressed? Or can you have a really wonderful family, no problems at all, and still fall into a very deep depression?
Well, we often think that mental disorders are caused by external circumstances, but actually, about 50% of our mental resources and abilities are determined genetically. It's no coincidence that any psychiatrist will always ask you about your medical history, who your relatives were, on your mother's side, your father's side, and so on.
Schizophrenia, for example.
Well, this is definitely a genetically determined disease, but you need to understand that schizophrenia is a psychosis with impaired thinking. Here is the main problem that we notice in patients with schizophrenia. It's a disturbance of thinking, that is, delusions. What is that? These are completely unrealistic, irrational thoughts. But there's the same kind of psychosis, which is characterized not by the intellectual, but by the affective sphere, by emotions. Well, we know it as manic depressive psychosis. And just like there is schizophrenia, there are different levels up to schizophrenic. Along this vector, there are schizotypal personalities, schizoid traits, and so on and so on. And that's how it is with everything. As for the emotional component, a significant number of people suffering from depression have a genetically determined level and order. Well, it's hard to say the differentiation for sure, but I estimate that since 20% of people will definitely experience a depressive episode in their lifetime, apparently about half of those cases will still be due to genetic factors. There are crisis situations where people in crisis end up in a state of depression, but this is not the kind of depression that people come to doctors with. I myself headed the crisis psychotherapy department at the Pavlov Clinic of Neuroses in St. Petersburg, back when I was still in public health care, and we received people with all kinds of crisis situations. That is, it could be the loss of loved ones, some kind of attacks, and so on. And people in this sense, they stop an acute anxiety attack, but then their mood drops as they try to return to normal life, which feels broken. But overall, this is a reactive state. It passes within 6 months. And most people suffer from depression that is not related to external circumstances. And on this biological basis, on this foundation, certain patterns are formed. Different schools explain this differently. Cognitive behavioral will say these are rational beliefs. Humanistic psychotherapy will say this is an existential crisis when a person tries to find meaning in life and simply cannot do it. The psychoanalytic approach claims these are self-destructive forces within us, because when we achieve comfort and when we deal with real threats like basic survival, having a roof over our head, a salary, everything is there and so on. This energy, which is biologically embedded in us to constantly survive, turns inward and destroys a person in an auto-aggressive way.
Interestingly, when everything goes well for me, it can actually cause me to develop depression. That's why successful people may turn to drugs, alcohol, or even suicide, for instance, management.
You've given classic examples of self-destructive behavior. And of course, most people here just drink themselves into oblivion without seeking psychotherapy or medical help, without taking antidepressants. They just drink as a so-called treatment for depression.
So the question is, did they reach some kind of limit, or did they lose their sense of purpose because they didn't set a new goal?
Our brain is designed, so it doesn't matter if you set a goal or not. We are not driven by our rational attitudes, we are driven by an inner lack, by the presence of a certain internal deficit. If we experience this deficit, no matter what kind it is, where it comes from and so on, we will keep paddling and achieving something. So, if we don't have this internal deficit, I call it a lack of lack, when there just isn't enough, a shortage, yes, a hunger. And the modern world is very strange. It creates the feeling that everything is available A lot of opportunities. If you don't want something, you want this, go ahead, and so on. And people get this feeling of, well, some kind of satiety, not in the sense that they've eaten a lot, but because they've seen a lot. Before, there was this thing called sugar for looking, sugar like that. You don't dip it.
I used to crave sugar just by looking at it. When sausage was added to sandwiches, you had to eat 2/3 of the bread first, since there wasn't enough sausage for all of it.
So now all of us are experiencing success just by looking at it, because everyone has the feeling that anything is possible, but that's not true. That's a lie. First of all, people who achieve a lot are actually under more pressure, they experience more stress, and so on. If we look at all areas of activity, achievements are never characterized, so to speak, by well-being. And this whole image of success is a false picture. And after that, the wonderful moments of life begin.
I have a question for you right away. I recently watched an interview with the founder of NVIDIA. They make video products, and their stock has skyrocketed. They asked him if he would have acted differently had he known about his company from the start. I would have never started it in my life, and none of my team would have gotten into this because it's just such hellish work. We went through such horror and wore ourselves out. If I had known, I would never have started. Now, my second question comes from this. Is it possible to be successful in business? For example, if you don't like what you're doing, everyone just says, find something you like. I know several doctors who dislike their job, yet at the same time,
I'm doing just fine. Well, of course, we like it when we achieve results, when you've been standing at the operating table for 6 hours, I don't think your legs feel incredibly good, your back feels great, your eyes are just saying, thank you so much for having us, and so on. It's clear that any work, of course, comes with discomfort and challenges in our field. Back when I started, there was a time when patients respected doctors simply because they were doctors. I come from a family of doctors, and that's always been true for us. We understood that it was almost like a medical cult. But now any doctor is competing with the internet, with search engines, and losing. It's inevitable because things are explained more clearly there, and how should I put it? It's more pleasant for the patient. If we talk about entrepreneurs, a large study conducted on entrepreneurs shows that these are people who differ from the general population by a whole set of specific characteristics. This includes an increased level of mental energy, which often manifests as a fairly high level of anxiety and can be complicated by depressive states. A characteristic feature is a kind of social Machiavellianism, when people do not trust each other, but they understand how to build relationships in such a way as to motivate a person to do what you need. They say Trump decides in just 20 seconds whether to keep talking to you. This is a very high social sensitivity without a sense of social feeling, such calculation and so on, a high degree of egocentrism, because we are social animals in general. And we always have some kind of balance between doing things for ourselves and doing things for others, so that others are also satisfied, and somehow maintaining this balance. But in fact, there are individuals among us who have more pronounced needs for power and influence, and for them, this is vital. That is, without this, they will feel miserable, and that's the curse, because they will inevitably feel this way even with a successful career. There will come a moment when they will miss their shot, like Akela, or they simply won't have enough strength to keep playing the same exhausting game. That's why I don't think the idea that everyone needs to become an entrepreneur or achieve some extraordinary success, especially social success, especially in our time, is a good one. You can clearly see what has happened to all our stars recently and before that. what happened when they were required to make statements about certain positions and so on. People there just do a little dance, sing a bit, 1.5 octaves, and some backup dancers, they've been on stage for 20 years, and then suddenly this happens. Well, go ahead and shout about yourself, who you are, why, just because you're a public figure, and of course it's a very pathetic sight.
By the way, right now is an example, I think, of manipulation, like when your idol tells you to do this, do that, you know. Please tell us about manipulation. We often encounter it in life. How can I avoid being manipulated? How am I supposed to realize that this is happening right now, and what should I do in this situation?
First, the better a person you are, the easier it is to manipulate you.
So I need to be a jerk?
Humanity is characterized by a presumption of trust. As social beings, we assume that we should trust other people. So that's why the current level of fraud and social engineering is so well known.
Sberbank, banks?
Well, actually, this applies to absolutely all banks and works everywhere. You just can't imagine how much effort is made so that when we suspect that a person is under the influence of scammers, we can stop them. Well, that's tens of billions of rubles that people lost to this fraud last year in 2023. They call and introduce themselves as citizens.
Even smart people fall for it. My former department head transferred the money himself.
They take loans. It's generally okay to trust people, but now technology allows someone to gain your trust. Soon there will be deepfakes. Your relatives will call you and say, "Sasha, please, it's urgent," and then hang up, and that call will be intercepted, and you won't be able to reach them, and you'll end up transferring the money. That's why we're living in a very harsh time, and of course manipulators and psychopaths are increasingly taking control of resources and gaining more power to manipulate.
But how can I tell if someone is saying something to me or acting toward me because they have some selfish motive? It's not always possible.
You can't.
It's impossible.
It's clear that you really want to have this magic recipe, but it's impossible. Because you're not actually communicating with another person, you're communicating with their image in your head. I mean, there he is. Photons are just bouncing off him. He makes the air vibrate, your eardrums vibrate, your inner ear creates the signal, which your brain then decodes. We don't really know another person on the inside. They're always a mystery, no matter what they tell us. You can spend 20 years with someone and suddenly think, who was that person? What did those 20 years mean? We don't know other people. It's a drama that's important for personal growth and for realizing just how complicated life really is and how alone we are in it. But if someone sets out to deceive you, well, there's a very high chance you'll be deceived.
Friends, I really want to give you a free app that I've been developing for several years with my team, and every day I keep improving it thanks to your feedback. This app has absolutely everything you need to cover all your fitness needs. Proper nutrition, workouts, video instructions on how to train correctly, various trackers, everything you need, including even podcasts and helpful articles. It's really free, and you can download it simply by following the link below this video. Stay healthy and enjoy using it. I have a Telegram channel, and recently I posted that I released a documentary video, and then some guy from an anonymous account started insulting my mother. A complete stranger started this for no reason, and then others, even their mother, stood up for me. And I have some people who, let's say, helped me. In minutes, I had his phone number, exact location, identity, and full background. First, I sent all his information directly to his phone number, then I called him, introduced myself, and he started shaking, immediately saying it wasn't him. Here's my question: why does a person's behavior change so much when there's anonymity? Someone will definitely write something bad about both you and me in the comments under this video. But this person most likely, if they were here, well, for example, when I'm next to our cameraman, would probably take a photo with you, say how wonderful you are, and say something nice to me. And I see this often. People who wrote nasty things to me online smile and shake my hand when we meet in person. Why is there such a difference, such a dissonance between real life and virtual life, and should a person be different in real life and on the internet?
Well, you're actually touching on a very complicated question. First of all, there's the so-called online disinhibition effect, which is caused by the possibility of anonymous expression. So now, this media space is starting to be perceived by everyone as something more real than physical life itself. People are spending more time there, and their interests are there too. According to futurists' predictions, soon we'll be spending more money on our personal needs, on our virtual characters, than on ourselves and so on, our physical selves. That's it. This area is becoming more and more significant. So, the possibility of anonymity allows people to demonstrate their strength, to show off their ego, and so on. So the problem lies in the possibility of physical contact. So why do boys in general often don't allow themselves what girls can allow themselves? Because when a boy is being raised and he does something wrong, he might get hit. But if a girl does something wrong, usually there's a scandal, some yelling, and that's it. Nothing really happens. And now this is spreading to our whole environment. And people are feeling more and more like they're not responsible for what they do.
Is that club above your head the only thing?
Yes, we're primates, and that means
We have less body hair now, but we're still primates as before.
some primates also have little hair, attractive faces, and color vision. But seriously speaking, we have been adapted for life throughout all the years since the emergence of different species and subspecies of Homo sapiens. We were oriented to live in a society of 100 to 150 people. Settlements, all of them that we had before the emergence of statehood. That is, as you understand, just a few thousand years ago. They were all quite small, with only 100 to 150 people. So, this is the so-called Dunbar's number, calculated by Robert Dunbar, the famous British anthropologist, who showed that the capacity of our brain to maintain social connections is enough for about 100 to 150 people. So, when there are more of us, in primitive conditions, in tribes, a division would occur. So to speak, two brothers would split up and divide, let's say, this commune into two parts again. Then language and a system of statehood emerged, and this immediately began to appear along with a system of violence, because the state is always about violence. There appeared a class of people who could use violence against others, and our entire civilization is built on violence, on killings. What is the most dangerous profession in terms of life expectancy and the risk of dying a violent death? Emperors, presidents, and so on. 5 out of 50 United States presidents were assassinated. Well, give or take, the statistics are about the same. What happened with our Tsars, I think, is also well known to everyone.
The omelette isn't very good.
Why? Because any system of violence, on the one hand, provides some kind of peaceful coexistence of different social groups. But at the same time, it is itself a source of destruction and is constantly under attack. That's why and now we've ended up in this endless village where in Moscow you can reach out to anyone. I said this after the president of the Russian Federation got a Twitter account, which is now banned in the Russian Federation. All of this is the end, because once you can write any kind of witty remark to the president, so to speak, that's when the sacredness of power ends, and this society simply loses its ability to remain stable. We're witnessing this unfold. I wrote a book called The Spirit of the Times, Introduction to the Third World War.
I haven't read it, but I'll get it and read it because you wrote it. Still, among the millions of people who, I hope, will watch this interview, we have someone who wrote something nasty. Teach us how to deal with, well, not criticism, but nastiness. We don't yet know if it's criticism or just nastiness. Teach us how you handle it. As a slow person, you've likely faced this often in your life.
Do you understand? I had a truly terrible experience related to the fact that I'm a doctor. I help a huge number of people. I was in charge of a crisis department, a crisis service that handles suicides and similar issues. I'm Dr. Kurpatov. And any creature from anywhere starts talking about me. A doctor who provides real help to real people, saves lives, and starts saying, "What am I there?" So something's wrong, they're showing something on television.
You were just talking about me. I'm at that stage and very interested.
And of course, that was incredibly humiliating and unpleasant. Moreover, I understood perfectly well that a significant part of the specialists who are mocking me now will actually be the main beneficiaries of the work I'm doing. That's true. After the Dr. Kurpatov show aired, psychologists began getting invited to various talk shows. Before, no one could have imagined something like that happening. Except for I myself and Masha Arbatova, no one else was on stage. That was, of course, wild and humiliating. And then at some point, well, you just have to come to terms with it and simply understand that it really has nothing to do with you at all. Everything these people say, the love they have, they're dealing with an image they've seen that they've drawn for themselves.
Today, a friend sent me something from a scoundrel. I don't watch these videos since I'm sensitive and already know myself. And people are just saying some crazy nonsense there, talking about producers and all that. I do everything myself. Basically, I don't need a producer. When I had one, he just organized the shoots, but everything in the frame and what I said was up to me. And them, do they really not get what an image means? They just imagined what I'm not.
They're dealing with their own idea, so it's just a matter of the personal image that people form. And there was our great neurophysiologist, Alexey Alexeyevich Ukhtamsky, the author of the famous principle of dominance. And he said, our world is as our dominants are. And so if a person's entire inner content is able, so to speak, to create an image where a person is nothing, cannot be called anything, and was made by someone unknown. This tells us exclusively about the person who leaves these comments.
That is, a person shares what he himself is filled with. Of course,
these are neurophysiologists. Interesting, huh? Well, I used to work in a small psychiatric hospital, and then it turned out that I was working in a big psychiatric hospital. Well, there are a lot of violent ones. Well, I eroticize. But here it's just important to understand that these are unfortunate people who, well, have this idea that, well, for example, when I was in charge of Krasny Kvadrat, we had a lot of production centers, different musicians, well, our composers like Yuri Trobish, Meladze, Fadif, and so on. Well, so are there any among the guys who graduate from the academy or somewhere else? Well, people, right? There are quite a few with supernatural talent, quite a few. But actually, first of all, to get through all these selections, I have to tell you this. We spent 5 days selecting people for the factory. There was a line. 20 people would enter together, each singing a musical phrase. Only after that did we give the first feedback, then the next feedback, and so on. So people went through a very big process. This, in fact, is already a very significant psychological stress, first of all. Next. So if they are not able to reproduce something that's needed for a performance, for a musical piece, and so on, no one will give them a slap. No one ever will. Now, moving on. These selections occur at every stage. And if a person makes it somewhere, then the commentator who sits there and criticizes him, well, no, there's really nothing to discuss, nothing to talk about.
We ignore it.
That's just it. They only evoke pity. That's all there is to it. He lives in an efficient world where there are a huge number of very strange publications and sources of information that produce an endless amount of all sorts of things. And they live off hype, negativity, bad reviews, and so on. And because of this, a person lives in this cesspool, thinking it's news like, well. You can feel sympathy for him, and if you don't have enough sympathy, you can treat him as someone mentally ill. If not that, then we just treat him like an idiot. Well, kind of on that level, so to speak, I
accepted it, noted it, and will use it as a guide. Question, a personal example. This is the best upbringing, that's what I thought. I recently had a son, he's my firstborn, and I used to say that, but now I'm thinking, will it really work like that? Why? I had a question, so I decided to ask you. I have a friend, oh, by the way, I stopped drinking for his birthday. I used to drink a couple of times a year. But why? No, you shouldn't. He doesn't drink and hides it, saying he feels fine, so I won't drink either. But I later learned he avoids alcohol because his father was a bad example and drank. Then I realized bad things can affect you. A bad example can also sometimes be a good way to teach, because when raising a child, a good example might work, but a bad example can actually be helpful too. Give some advice. The best way to raise a child.
humility.
How?
But the thing is, we think this is our child, but in reality, our child is a completely independent person with their own genetic makeup. And now, of course, more and more modern research shows how important genetic factors are, but we don't see them in ourselves. According to the latest research, 40% of alcoholism is now genetically determined. That's why maybe the example of the father really played a role here, or maybe it was just luck in the lottery that the father was there. Your friend was not among those 40% of potential alcoholics. Here's another child, a completely different being. Moreover, genetically, our genes are in him, but how they are expressed will be a completely independent story. The second thing is that we are now in a situation where social institutions are collapsing. This isn't related to any external factors. There's no need to look for some kind of conspiracy here. The higher the level of prosperity in society, the more the old social institutions, such as the patriarchal family, respect for elders, and social hierarchies, collapse. This is happening everywhere. In China right now, there's a huge problem. 25% of young Chinese people are unemployed, not because there are no jobs, but because they don't want to work anymore, although...
It would seem, yes, the Chinese are considered the most hardworking people.
But that's just how we see them all, right? But there was just one family there. One child, the child was, so to speak, the center of the universe. Let's all dance around him.
This raised a destructive generation.
They are called the strawberry generation in China, and in Britain they're called snowflakes. Well, that's a term journalists came up with to describe them, not a scientific one, and you should look at the research. They make this into hype, but in China it's called the strawberry generation. They get crushed very quickly by external circumstances and lose their shape. And this is really a big problem for these developed societies with declining birth rates. This is to say that we can no longer be authorities for our children because we, their parents, before it was taken for granted that if I had parents, they were authorities. Now this no longer works. That is, social institutions are being destroyed. So, genetically they are different beings, and third, they are in a completely different sociocultural environment. So, the most important thing is how a child's internal principles are instilled. This is from 10 to 14 years old. This is before and at the beginning of puberty. So this is the period when a child first starts to act independently. That is, before this, he acted situationally. Whatever situation arose, he adapted to it. But when this period begins, after the age of 10, when he starts to evaluate his own actions internally, it means that during this time he forms this set of life principles. I paid close attention back in my day. I myself was a Komsomol member. I managed to join the Komsomol. I was the head of the pioneer squad, and my younger sister only managed to become an Oktyabryanok. I found it interesting to look at the age cohorts and those who managed to join the Komsomol, those who managed to become pioneers or even Oktyabryonoks. They managed to join. These are different. We had a whole set of different generations, and they evaluated what was good and what was bad differently, how to do things right, how to do things wrong, and so on. Because a new set of values and social expectations was forced on them during the critical period. And their behavior, and my behavior, and your behavior at that age, that's what shaped how we would think in the future. Today's children, those who are being born now, are born into a digital environment where there are no unified common rules. So, for example, a child watches the most harmful cartoon, like Masha and the Bear, where a little girl runs around and constantly humiliates and uses the good, hard-working, responsible bear, and she always gets away with it. And then,
I mean that kind of context.
please remember, Nu Pogodi, in that cartoon we had a good hare and a bad wolf,
Who smoked and swore,
and he tried to do bad things to the hare, so we rooted for the hare. Well, we liked folk for our own reasons. It was kind of a game, the edge, so to speak, of our emotions. And the machine is just a destructor, this girl, creating attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that's normal. And Masha is cool. And the whole world is watching Masha, while the bear is a loser, just working, trying to keep things in order, and so on. And our children now find themselves in this environment where there are no universal rules that could make them more successful and more protected in life. Because it's not about whether children have these values or other ones. That's not the point. The question is whether they will harm themselves or not. I left my psychiatric practice quite a while ago, because after you go on television and start talking about everything on Channel 1, at that point you're no longer a doctor, but more like Diogenes' lantern, shining a light, treating with radiation, so to speak. And that's not the kind of work I'd like to be doing. But now I have to return, and more often, people from my closest circle, basically my peers or those a bit younger, who have children of a certain age, are coming to me for help. Well, of that sort, in the teenage, preteen years, basically from 10 to 15 or 16. So for girls, what does that mean? It means suicides. It means they don't want to live. And this is a deliberate, meaningful, serious decision, after which parents have no idea what to do. It's an epidemic that nobody discusses, but it's a very tough issue. According to statistics in the United States, a third of teenage girls have thought about suicide, tried to commit suicide, and so on. This is an incredible increase. So, well, it's different for boys. Boys at the age of 8, 9, or 10 are getting access to pornography. And at that age, their minds are not able to process this in any adequate way. And as a result, we end up with very severe psychological traumas. Or it's endless video watching, when a child doesn't leave the house or even their room at all, and just constantly gets stuck watching. But it's those strange videos where someone is jumping, falling, doing something antisocial, and kids start repeating it.
We had a case where a girl who was a medical worker was leaving a cosmetology clinic and someone dropped a 50-liter container of liquid on her. Because two guys, I think 12 and 14 years old, repeated what Mikhail Litvin did with that container, and the container fell. A broken collarbone, a ruptured spleen, a limp arm. The girl is in intensive care. Here's an example of destructive behavior. Right now, many people will say, well, parents should raise their kids themselves, but there are families that aren't very well off, where unfortunately the tablet becomes the example.
The problem is that raising a child is a stressful thing in general. They constantly require time and attention. So, in the first year, you don't sleep well. In the second year, you don't sleep well, and you're constantly running around. But it's, so to speak, a necessary part of development. And then he starts sticking it in his nose, in his mouth, in his ears, and basically injures himself in every possible way. The way,
How to raise them is to do nothing.
the most convenient tool is to give him a phone. A phone,
That's it.
it's complete mobilization of the child. He sits and doesn't bother Misha's lower network. And our children are now being raised by nannies called the phone. The most viewed videos on YouTube are those completely devoid of any meaning. It's endless junk. What else do you see there? Did you find any narrative? So we watch it ourselves. It's just an endless sausage of chopped up fragments. Because for a child, they can't understand the narrative yet.
It's necessary.
So that it's right in front of their eyes all the time, as if they're sitting in some kind of burrow, peeking out and watching what's happening out there. And unfortunately, that's what happens with our children, you see. In 2019, half of children under the age of 10 were constantly online. That was 2019, and 5 years have passed since then. This is data from Kaspersky Labs, so it's clear that this is the case, and it's, well, a huge problem. I spoke about this in the Federation Council, I think it was in 2020. Only now have they started to introduce restrictions on phone use in schools, but teachers there just have no rights at all. Well, they can't even give a failing grade, because if they do, their performance indicators will drop, so they can't give failing grades. So then the kid swears at the teacher, sits with the phone, watches the phone during class, and this is considered normal practice.
If I had done something like that, they would have called my father. Yeah, God forbid. God forbid I ever did that, but I couldn't even imagine doing something like that. Once they called my family to school because my grandmother, going through menopause, was always hot. At home, it was always about menopause, and how was I supposed to know? I was just a kid. In 5th grade, I said, "You or Sergey are suffering from menopause," and they were confused. The school called my parents in. He didn't just say it, he said it insultingly. That always seemed wild to me.
Kids now swear at him and teachers, and it's no big deal anymore, but what about the parents? We took away the school's role in upbringing. It used to be written in the rules, that's why we had a vice principal for educational work, all those pioneer organizations and so on. They organized activities for the child, formed a certain set of values and priorities for them, which in general worked. And now we have a situation where the school provides services to parents, and parents assume that if they are provided services, those services will be delivered poorly. I'm not saying that our school works perfectly. It has its own problems and difficulties. But it's obvious that this change in status, when teaching stopped being a respected profession, led to us losing something. The previous education system was able to produce truly qualified specialists. That's a fact.
These dependencies that form from gadgets, and not just gadgets, from anything really, this common phrase, dopamine pit, how can a person realize they've fallen into this pit?
Well, it's simple to understand. If you simply turn off notifications on a person's phone, if someone still hasn't done that, then for the next day or so, their cortisol levels will be high, and they'll be in a state of anxiety. Something's wrong, there always has to be something happening. Right now, we're all digitally addicted, except for the rare people who really don't use a phone and don't carry it with them, like, for example, Israelis. In 2014, they conducted remarkable research. They studied ordinary people who already had smartphones, and also those who had never had a smartphone before. They showed that all smartphone users have higher attention deficit hyperactivity disorder scale scores. And since then, adult attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has become a diagnosis that can easily be given to all of us, which is why everyone is dependent. Dopamine pits are just a special term for the effect associated with watching videos that lack any particularly deep meaning, which basically works on the dopamine system. Because, as Wolfram Schultz once showed with macaques, we get reinforcement when we form an image of a completed result. That is, they were just looking at shapes on a computer screen. And a certain combination of shapes indicated that they would get grape juice, which was delivered through a tube, and so dopamine was released in response to the combination of shapes, not to the grape juice itself. That is, the grape juice was already expected, so it no longer caused a dopamine spike. So basically, when we watch short videos, we're watching to see how they end. There, for example, a cat stands still, and now it's about to jump, fall, meow, and so on. And it's this anticipation, the closure of the gestalt. So, it leads to these dopamine spikes. A large amount is pointless. How many can you watch? 1, 2, 3. For each one, we release a little bit of dopamine. It gives us a feeling of anticipation.
That something is about to happen.
But constantly. Yes, that's how any gambling addiction works, like with slot machines. If you...
That it's about to hit now, but...
And or...
The stock market will rebound now.
What should we do with Bitcoin exchanges before that? But that's a question you can't be forced to answer. Here.
I caught myself as...
Not by
class. It's possible. You have a phone, I do too, really. Now everyone will say on 5 in the village they send us. So how do you catch this? That I'm overdoing it with this? That I need to somehow limit it already?
You need to understand the mechanism as soon as you realize that this is actually a mechanism of addiction. You can't cure someone with agromania if they don't understand. Well, back in the day, I actively fought against those one-armed bandits because I had a lot of suicidal patients. There was a huge epidemic of suicides across the country when people lost their money in the 2000s and even earlier, back in the 90s.
And remember those machines where you tossed in a 1 ruble coin?
And I wrote reports for the Federation Council. In the Expert Council, I described these invoices. Help, this is just a disaster. And then they passed those laws for happiness, that's it. But I had a large number of patients with this gambling addiction, and what I suggested they do, this is what I told them. Dear friends, do you believe that you are truly addicted, that you are just losing money? His little one didn't come back. When we believe, here is some money for you, tear it up. Well,
because for us they might drop it, we'll say yes.
So accordingly, this was clear evidence that they didn't understand that they were throwing money away by working, well, with this, playing this slot machine. So, truly understanding the mechanism leads to you letting go. When you realize that you're throwing money away, that it's impossible to win against the casino, only at that moment do you stop playing. But as long as you think, somewhere in the back of your mind, that you can still beat the casino, it's impossible to cure this. First, understand the mechanism. And why does it take so much effort to popularize and explain these mechanisms so that it becomes a psychological rule? Because we have to limit consumption further. There are digital hygiene skills that, of course, need to be practiced. A phone can't be in just any part of the apartment, which means there are areas where it shouldn't be. These areas are the bathroom, the toilet, and the bedroom. There's no place for gadgets in the children's room or the kitchen. But now that I've said this, our viewers are probably shocked because they can't imagine eating without their phone or going to the bathroom without their phone. What about leaving the phone in another room at bedtime? At one time, I gave a lecture either at the Ministry of Internal Affairs or at El Dorado, I don't remember which company, and I talked there about this digital addiction. I said, the phone shouldn't be in the bedroom, and they asked me, but how are we supposed to wake up then? I said, look at your inventory, you obviously should have alarm clocks there. People have just forgotten that there's a way to wake yourself up. You don't have to carry your phone with you for that.
But you say, it shouldn't be that way. Now they're watching, saying, don't listen to him. He's always on his phone, even while brushing his teeth or in the bathroom, and now he's lecturing us. That's why many experts discredit themselves. They say things like, a happy relationship is the key, but they've already had 4 wives. Or they say, don't hit women, don't hit children. It makes the news when someone beats someone up. There was this psychologist, I don't want to name names, who beat up, well, I don't know, a female audience member who came to his masterclass. Honestly, just like that. There's a place where you don't have your phone,
I think
or do you still try? No.
I have a phone. I come in and put it right on the table where I have a charger, and I don't take it off. So you just won't be able to, well, imagine how much effort you would have to spend.
Yeah, I want to throw it away. I'm already, I don't know, sick of it, but I can't. My friends and I, you won't have a sauna at my place. What if a friend calls or someone at the clinic needs me, and every time my battery dies, I get anxious? Now it's dead, they're calling and can't get through, someone is dying. Well, before
What do you think?
I myself, I remember my childhood, I only had a phone at home.
We didn't have television at home, but I'm older. We shared with friends, lived well, and solved problems together. That's deceptive. But what's important here is what you're doing. You see, when you try to be perfect, you will definitely mess up. Well, that's just how it works. So here you simply make an internal decision. Lev Semenchgotsky, my favorite psychologist, and often called the domestic Mozart of psychology, used to say, there is no willful feeling. First, there is a struggle of motives, and then a decision is made. While your motives are struggling, you haven't made a decision yet. But once you've made a decision, there is no longer any struggle of motives. Beautiful, that's real. We haven't found it anywhere in the brain. We've scanned it using functional magnetic resonance imaging, positron emission tomography, and so on. We haven't found willpower anywhere. We've found memory, everything, but willpower.
There's no strength without willpower.
There's no willpower, yes. So that's the question. It's just a decision. It's easy to make. Because if you realize that every time you'll have to fight not to grab your phone, it's better to decide that you'll just show up. It will be lying in one place because you'll come up to it once, then twice, then 3 times. It's a habit, all of us. The tendency toward dynamic, stereotypical behavior. Even Petrovich Pavlov described this clearly, and further. So, children, when a child sees you walking around with this thing, you'll never be able to explain to them that they don't need this thing. Well, it's impossible. So, when you get home, turn on your work computer on the desk and open your messengers there. And sure enough, it pings, you go and reply.
Here's an interesting fact. When I bought my apartment, I bought it from the Consul of Armenia, and people will start Googling which apartment the Consul of Armenia lived in. I ask, where's the television? And I was surprised, like, how come there's no television? He said, we don't watch television, we get together, we have dinner in the evening, we talk with the family. And it turns out to be true.
Well, it's really a matter of how we organize our own lives. Well, I don't have one either. I don't watch television at all, and I really have no need for any of these screen things. I read books, and if I want to watch a movie, I'll watch a movie separately, but not for this. There's absolutely no need to turn it into constant background noise. Nothing benefits your mind more than complete silence, reassuring your instinct for self-preservation that all is well.
Turns out you could. My friends and I always go, but you shouldn't overuse headphones. Working out without music might be better.
Or,
Is it like extra stimulation? And during this period, it's mine.
I think it's clear that there are certain habits and so on, but I think they've been adopted. It's very important. It's important to focus exactly on what you're doing. If we're talking about sports activities, because it's kind of an intellectual involvement. It's not just about lifting weights or doing exercises, but focusing on your body itself will simply lead to better results. Although I was told a wonderful story about the American Olympic swimming team, that there was a moment when the team, which always used to win because Americans had super swimmers, suddenly didn't have a single player at all. That was a period when kids stopped going swimming. Because at that time, there were no headphones that kept the water out. But now, after that, they invented headphones so they could because they can be in silence, they experience panic, because it's unnatural. Yes, so overall, I'm absolutely not against using musical things there. I listen to music, I think that's a different matter. It's just hard to work intellectually. When I'm doing simple or technical tasks like reviewing documents, I can listen to music, but I can't do that when I'm writing.
Tsar, the question is, what does a man owe and to whom? According to Dr. Kurpatov, we side cautiously with the answer yes.
Well, the thing is, you see, I keep trying to explain a simple but very complicated idea. So we live by constantly trying to carry our own ego in some way. No, that's ours. If you imagine Sisyphus with his stone, the stone of a person is his own, and he is constantly rolling this stone uphill. If we do something just to match this idea of who I am, it will be a dishonest action, and well, it shouldn't be done. For your mother, whom you care for your wife, whom you care for your child, whom you care for them, for your own ego. That's why the logic of should is good. I'm actually in favor of everyone owing something to each other, because it leads to social order. If everyone thinks that nobody owes anyone anything, that's a disaster.
We live in a society, so we should care for each other. That's why I support it.
I'm in favor of it, but if my motivation is just to fit some kind of image, then there won't be any real good in it. That is,
Turns out nobody owes anyone, but you still need to be good.
actually, it's a great art to be a good person. Intelligence and kindness are the two greatest virtues and the most difficult ones, and being kind is hard. You have to achieve a great degree of humility, and being intelligent is also very difficult. It requires constant intellectual work.
You know, there was a line in a movie. The movie itself wasn't serious at all, but the line was brilliant. If God is all powerful, he cannot be good. Well,
I don't know anything about God. I don't have any direct connection with him.
kindness alone isn't enough to live on.
But Charles Darwin had several great paradoxical questions. For example, he was absolutely driven crazy by the peacock's feather, because it was against the logic of natural selection. He then introduced a second concept, which may actually be more important, sexual selection, highlighted by the peacock's feather. But among his troubling questions, he had more. He especially wondered why humans are so intelligent and kind to each other. Because this goes against natural selection, since it's easier to be strong and dumb than to be reflective, intelligent, kind, and so on. But the secret turned out to be revealed when Bass carried this out. Remarkable. An evolutionary psychologist conducted a study across 48 cultures and showed that the main quality by which we choose our sexual partners for life is this. Intelligence and kindness, that's why these are the most important characteristics. Initially, something else may attract you, but when choosing a partner, you'll pick intelligence and kindness. And this sexual selection led to these qualities becoming established in us, but these qualities require constant reproduction. They won't work on their own, and it's hard work, especially in a world where it's not common. Kind, oh you, why? Why smart? Why are you so smart? And it got stuck. Unfortunately, we live in such a world, so what should you do? You don't owe anything. That's not a pity. It's sad.
I recently saw something about body language and gestures with Menshova. I think the guest was with Yulia, and he was talking about body language and gestures, saying that how I sit is important, it matters. I watched it, and much of what he said is true. For example, I don't do it that way. I just drink normally. I hadn't thought about it before, but then I started to. And really, I guess I did make some conclusions about a person based on how they
behave,
stand, how they sit. Can you explain what's behind that? Why does the way you sit or behave make me either favor you or think something about you?
You asked a lot of questions at once. So, question 1. Does our movement mean anything? It does mean something because any emotion consists of 3 components: muscular, autonomic, and cognitive. You can't really be happy without a smile, and your facial muscles will still give you away and show something. Secondly, when you read information from another person, you do it by projecting your own perception patterns onto them, not because you actually know what's going on in their head. And there's the remarkable Paul Ekman. There's a brilliant television series with Tim Roth, where he watched with alchemy. Yes, it's brilliant, but it has no scientific backing. The author himself, Alan Pease, who was the original creator, he did a great job. If you see a person in a closed posture, before you think anything, check what's going on with the window.
Maybe he's just cold.
He might be cold, he might have a backache.
It's comfortable?
Anything could be happening to him. But we interpret it thinking that there's a simple... In the lie detector, which measures the slightest reactions, our pores, sweat, movement, breathing, heart rate, and so on. It never gives 100% guarantee and is not used as a means of accusation. So, when we hook a person up to sensors and first do the calibration, meaning we know how they react when they're calm and so on, we still can't say for sure. And then we come in, look at everyone playing, but I think today this one is deceiving me. That's it.
Reading books. I have a friend. He's sitting right now next to our cameraman. He reads a lot of non-professional literature, mostly classics. So I have a question. Is reading becoming a thing of the past? At least paper reading. Is reading books electronically still holding on somehow? Many people listen to audiobooks, and a lot of different services have appeared. The fact is, reading is good exercise for the brain. That's a fact in itself. What does it mean for us if it goes away? What are the consequences? And do we need to read books? If we do, then why?
I can talk about this for hours.
But in short, is a show good or bad? You can turn on an audiobook by Dast, which means...
First of all, well, an audiobook. I have nothing against fiction audiobooks, especially if they're done professionally. That's great. So why do we need to read at all? So, the thing is, reading assumes that you hold your attention proactively. The letters don't just get into your head, you sort of extract them from the text. Okay. When you watch a movie, the plot gets into your head using music, extras, and so on and so on and so on. And that's why the intellectual function, when we watch movies, dominoes, and so on, doesn't work. That's why those who watch television, it was proven already 10 years ago that they develop Alzheimer's 7 to 8 years earlier than those who read books. This is a medical fact. So the first thing is proactive attention, meaning our mental activity. The second is when we read books, we spend 40% of the time lost in thought, reading, then reflecting, getting confused, and letting our minds wander. And at that moment, actually, our subconscious is solving our main life questions. The brain's default mode network activates precisely when we are wandering. As Mark Stretchu called it, the brain's dark matter, where our most important decisions are made. Therefore, this also makes us wiser in practical matters. So, the next point is about sentence length. You see what I mean? So, a modern person can no longer read a sentence from 19th century literature. Young people, they start reading a sentence.
It's hard to understand.
Because they can't understand it. Why? The thing is, our central executive network, which is responsible for intellectual processing, works with 3 intellectual objects over the course of 3 seconds. So that's why a sentence as a whole, well, we have 3 seconds. That's why in most languages and primitive writing systems, this usually wasn't the case. There will be continuous writing, but separate words appeared, which 7 plus or minus 2 is the classic number of objects we can hold, and we can perceive them as a single object. There are always periods in the sentence. So, before, imagine a person could read a sentence that was half a page long, but that's how the sentences of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Chekhov, Gogol, and so on were. But a modern person, if there are more than 5 words, he already can't read, he doesn't understand the idea.
It's uncomfortable.
He can't hold a thought longer than 5 words. So, what can you understand if you can only take 5 words at a time and then just glue them together? This is fundamental. That's why reading is actually a workout for our brain. It turns out to cook up context.
The current generation doesn't read, and as a result, they might actually be dumber because of it, but
They are already dumber. All of this has been researched, all the studies have been conducted.
they're about to pounce. Yes,
Please look, if the research was published in 2023, but that's in the United States, everything has been checked there and so on. A 15-point decrease in cognitive function in the current one. Take a look at our wonderful psychologist, Isinovskaya, who has been conducting longitudinal studies in schools for the past 30 years. And she clearly shows that the level of conceptual thinking in our children is simply destroyed. These are facts now. Everything is shown in the research. You don't need...
every generation complains saying, "Book it back in our day, but now..."
Well, let them show the research. I don't mind. At first I was criticized a lot because I started talking about this before any research existed. I discussed informational pseudo-imbecility here at the Snob editorial office.
Pseudo-imbecility is such an interesting word.
Yes, I once described pseudo-delusional disorders. This was back in the 90s when we encountered a huge number of people with induced delusions, and it wasn't the usual induced type, but rather a very specific kind. There were a lot of sects back then. People would end up in them and basically start showing these kinds of delusional symptoms. And the psychiatrist was supposed to diagnose him with schizophrenia because he had a thought disorder at the level of delusions. But we were conducting research and showing that there are patients with these pseudo-delusional disorders. This was in the late 90s and early 2000s when there were a large number of pseudo-delusional disorders, but starting from the early 2010s. So when I talk about pseudo-imbecility, I mean that the brain is not originally, well, usually people suffering from imbecility or intellectual disability. It's a genetically determined factor. And, well, there were consequences of severe injuries, infectious diseases, and so on. But these are normal brains. People could have been normal, but for that they needed to be in different conditions so that their brains could develop.
Many of them don't like it now.
Well, what can you do? I really sympathize with them, with myself. Honestly, I empathize with everyone a lot.
Haven't you seen? Many people now, so-called bloggers or coaches, they say, look at school education, sines, cosines, theorems, poems. Why do I need this in life? I've never needed this in my life, but as I see it, a lot of this is included in the curriculum because it's a way of training, among other things. It's
just training, moreover, it's just training. So, the most difficult thing we can produce is the so-called concept of thinking, when we reason about things that can't be touched or felt, things that are abstract. That is, all of science. For example, in geometry, or let's take any field of medicine, there's a diagnosis, right? That's something that actually exists. But essentially, there isn't an understanding of something specific. So it's a combination of certain symptoms that are caused by some general etiological factor, and they have their own progression over time, and which we can observe through indirect signs that the patient provides us with when they come for an appointment. So this is an absolutely ephemeral concept. It exists only in the doctor's mind, and we try to explain to the patient, you see, you have this or that, and we explain it to him. But he doesn't understand, because he doesn't even imagine having this organ. In terms of histology, anatomy, or pathological anatomy, he has no understanding of what the humoral system is and so on. He doesn't know this. He can't even imagine it. And recently, doctors conducted a very interesting experiment. They put artificial intelligence and doctors side by side, and the artificial intelligence evaluated patients and gave them answers, and the doctors lost. The patients chose artificial intelligence. The way he explained things was as if he was talking to people who don't understand anything, in detail, very clearly. A doctor wouldn't do that. He has the curse of knowledge. If he knows the patient has angina, why would he bother explaining it to him? I won't burden you with religion, just take a small charm with you. And then I won't tell him about what exactly is going on, which coronary vessel it is, or that this scar is healing, and so on. Why would I tell him all that? I'll just explain it simply, since he doesn't understand. And now we are in a situation where people are unable to create these kinds of things that are actually necessary for thinking. The goal of school is to teach a child so that, ideally, by the end of school, he can actually understand what the problem with quantum mechanics is. If he can grasp and understand that when we talk about quantum wave-particle duality, it's not that it's a particle and a wave, but rather something that can't be imagined, even though it can be described. That's when we've developed thinking. But to achieve this, one has to go through a very long journey, which, unfortunately, very few manage to do.
A postponed life. A huge number of people don't know how to be happy, even though they seem to be quite successful in their profession, in business, and in relationships. I've caught myself doing this too. I make some purchase or achieve something, and instead of enjoying it today, I stand by the window and start making plans in my head. So, the next goal is this. Enjoy it, you managed to do it today, at least for some period of time, even if it's just a little celebration. But I'm always thinking, always setting new goals. And I realize that I have this postponed life, it's there in my life. How do I deal with it, and why does it happen?
Because, you see, we are not made for happiness like everyone else chasing after it.
But listen,
If they keep records, the effect, you don't know if it makes sense. But just because they believe in God doesn't mean God exists. It doesn't prove anything, but it definitely doesn't mean that He exists. No, happiness, of course, we weren't created for it. We were created for struggle. All along, where? Show me a happy primate, one who just sits there, all Buddha-like, a primate Buddha. Have you seen one? There isn't such a thing. Show me. So what happened to them? No, but happiness is an absolute fiction. Something we've always been comforted with. It's like our psychological medicine. We were always told that everything would be bad, bad, bad. And then I have to say, if the endings of these fairy tales are positive, it means they've done something wrong. Since then, they lived happily ever after, and the era of Romanticism appeared in the 19th century. Before that, all fairy tales ended badly, as they should have. The Brothers Grimace.
she has bad fairy tales.
All folk tales end in pure drama. Well, that's true, as someone joked. It's better to start with they lived happily ever after, and then our troubles began. That's why happiness is just an illusion. It's impossible. It's not the result of spiritual work or inner work on oneself. It's about getting rid of attachments, of unrealistic expectations, and the ability to accept the world as it is. It's a tremendous effort that you have to go through in order to feel this independent from external circumstances. And people have gone through it in countless different schools and traditions, starting from Buddhism and ending with, say, Epicureanism, Stoicism, and so on. It's all about teachings on how to temper your ambition in the broadest sense of the word. But at the same time, it's clear that Seneca was one of the richest people in the Roman Empire, a Stoic, and he left us wonderful letters in which he describes, so to speak, humility. That doesn't mean doing nothing. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, an outstanding Stoic. It doesn't mean not taking action. But internally we must free ourselves free ourselves from the expectation of happiness. As long as you keep waiting for it, you won't get it. You'll always miss the target because there is no target. There is no happiness.
You have to live in the moment.
That's good, sure, but the problem is that it's impossible.
But what about dreams?
Dreams? That's what I'm saying. No, it doesn't cancel them out. The right mindset, the right understanding of life doesn't cancel out actions, values, your personal importance, and so on. Moreover, thanks to this, you gain additional. You do it because it's internally important and valuable to you, creating positive feelings.
3 unknown facts about our brain that you can share with us.
But most facts about the brain are unknown to the majority, the overwhelming, absolute majority of people.
But some facts our viewers can understand, find interesting, and possibly useful.
Well, let's do it this way. What I described in the red pill, fact number 1, when you think you're making a decision, by that moment, it's already been made. It doesn't matter what it is.
I'm thinking, considering whether I should or shouldn't, but in reality, I already know what I'm going to do.
Well, if I took this bottle of liquid right now, believe me, I would consciously make that decision, but my brain would have already made it before I did. That is, our decisions are made at the level of the brain, of consciousness. It's just that they are an interface, and what we saw is actually the interface, not that we consciously made some decision. And all these conscious choices, struggles, and so on.
They say the first choice is usually the best decision.
Well, sometimes that's the case, especially if there's some prior preparation, but in general, the brain is just constantly sitting there weighing different circumstances. But when you're operating, for example, and you realize you need to stitch, you've already decided to stitch, and after that you hear a voice in your head saying, "All right, let's stitch." Does that mean you're always... Consciousness is always lagging behind, that's the first thing. And the second, our behavior is determined not by our internal attitudes, but by situational things, by circumstances. Social psychology has clearly shown that we constantly, without realizing it, mimic our circumstances. If we ask a person whether they would help someone who is in a difficult life situation, most people will say yes, of course, but they won't actually do it. But the truth is that when such a situation actually happens, an overwhelming minority of people will follow these rules, because in those circumstances, other factors will come into play. I'm running late, I have a lot of other things to do. There are people here who are much more competent. That's why, if you're dying, it's better to die in the presence of just 1 or 2 people. As soon as there are 10 of them, the chance that you'll survive drops to almost 0. So that's 1, 2, that's the second point I mentioned. And 3, what else can I tell you about the brain? Well, let's do this. Our memories, what we think about our lives, it's all not true. It means our brain doesn't store memories. It remembers that something like that happened. And every time you remember something, you're actually recreating a picture, not replaying a recording. You're always redrawing it, putting new and new meanings into it. That's why, for example, we actually don't remember our childhood. And when you're raising your son and you think, well, at your age, I was already, no, you were just as much of a fool as he is. That's it. That's why you should never rely on your own memories. And that's a good thing. It frees us, but it also makes us more responsible for our specific next steps. What is sexuality? Oh, well, you ask a question,
Why? I'm asking because when you mentioned sign language, I wondered why some people can look visually identical, even 2 twins, but one is sexually attractive and the other is not.
But you're asking about this subtle subjective effect?
That's beauty in the eye, in my understanding, or it's just what I have.
This is when the paranormal starts for you.
But you've probably already encountered this in your own life.
But without it, you see, this is really some kind of paranormal stuff. I don't know, our most famous model, a world-class one. Well, she's not a model anymore, but still the most. So she comes in, well, into the office. We meet in Ostankino. She comes in, wow, we're just sitting there talking with a friend, turning around, and the virus twisted. And I understand why she is like that. Well, what is it? You look at her appearance, well, just, well, kind of,
Ordinary.
Not at all. And it's not that we have sexuality, that's clear. We have, at a certain age, certain sexual fixations form, meaning we like certain objects sexually. This is determined by two periods. The first identification happens around the age of 3, when the question of dividing into boys and girls first arises. That's the first period. The second period is adolescence, when sexuality spontaneously emerges in teenagers. But right now we're talking about boys. With girls it's a bit more complicated because it works differently for them. And so whatever happens spontaneously, however it gets established there and so on. So if something is, well, sexual, it will be natural. Meaning everything that is natural and healthy will seem sexual to us, because that's biological. That's why if we see on the body, it probably should decorate a man, but on a woman's body, if we see a scar or something else, it's the opposite, it's traumatic. Yes, we don't like it and so on. So actually, but this is biological, because if there's an injury there, she won't be able to carry a child. Which means if a woman has very narrow hips, she won't be able to carry a child. That's why women with broad shoulders and narrow hips, but a man with broad shoulders and narrow hips, it's fine, please. Everything is good, let it be. And for men, if you give them photos of women of different ages and nationalities and so on, they will all choose the same photo from all the ages, all 24 years old. But I'm speaking as a doctor to a doctor. At 25, they are considered to be of advanced maternal age, so 24 is, so to speak, the prime age for reproduction. That's why, whether you're 50, 100, or 16, you'll be aiming for 24.
So this so-called midlife crisis in reality doesn't exist.
A midlife crisis is truly unique. It's when a person experiences an age-related crisis, during which he thinks that after this, he moves into the status of an old man. The unwillingness to feel old is realized in men, and it's amazing. Nezdilov told me about this. Such an outstanding psychotherapist who worked in hospices said that people who are already terminally ill with cancer experience an incredible desire to get pregnant, and even couples of cancer patients form in hospices. They may understand it intellectually, but still, it's the desire to feel alive again, and for men it's like a last fling. This is the age when, at first, our age seems to be developing, and we think that everything is still ahead of us, like Valyaja is still ahead, right?
Just like...
Then suddenly it happens. Not at 45, not that crisis, but usually around 54.
There could be a hormonal factor involved, possibly.
And I think it's more related to the fact that we react a lot to how others react to us. As long as they shout, "Young man, when you, hey father, move over."
Sit down, father.
At that moment, we are the same. Now I'm 50 and I feel a little like I'm 16. It feels really good.
By the way, to look.
But that's not my achievement. It's genetics, as they say. But I feel like I'm 16 for no reason. It seems to me
It will always be like that.
And at some point, someone else will tell me I'm not 16.
To sober up a bit, 61.
And that's when we'll falter.
Dr. Kurpatov asks if searching for life's meaning is worthwhile, noting that animals don't seek it and many are happy.
But you see, the thing is, since we've been taught language, a world of the non-existent has appeared for us. The fact that there is no death for me.
By the way, there's a question about death.
Yes, but there's no death. What is death anyway? We didn't exist before we were born, and we don't worry about that. We don't struggle. We don't run around. In a fit, Lord, I wasn't there. In the whole year of 1973, what a nightmare. I should shoot myself. Not even talking about the war. Well, it just wasn't there, thank God.
There won't be, and so...
And there won't be, and not like that either, and so on. But death is, first of all, death-I. We think that our self has some value in this world. But our self hasn't been found in the brain. It's always our idea of ourselves, which changes, transforms, and so on. No, in the brain. I wish it could be found, or maybe programmed into artificial intelligence to reproduce, but that's not even possible here. This story about brain transplants, if they did them, I wouldn't do it myself. Well, I mean, even if you could encrypt everything, which is impossible, but even if it were possible, still no. That's why. But we think and live within the space of meanings, language, the concept of these things, and so on. We fear leaving this world, but it can happen easily. With Alzheimer's, we might fall out of it and end up only with ourselves, still trying to communicate. Well, they'll take poor care of you, of course, but Bruce Willis shows. Look at the poor guy. He's not with us. He's gone.
He doesn't recognize anyone physically.
He's physically here, arms, legs, but who's missing? Where am I? He acted in Die Hard or whatever other movie there was, but now it's all gone. That's why, so why are we discussing this? There are things that are important to us. When we're dying, and someone comes to you and says, so you're dying, let's ask you now how you lived your life. And you'll remember the people you loved, and that will be the most important thing. I spent 23 years and a month in intensive care, and, well, everyone says you're holding on heroically. I had it in Guianobara, and at first they thought it wasn't because of him. No, I don't see, and they told me, and the doctor said, my mind is clear, peripheral paralysis. And I couldn't move at all, nothing moved. But you could say, well, even the deep abdominal muscles were gone, everything was gone, it had already reached the chest. Swallowing was difficult, everything was affected. But I'm not proud, they said I wouldn't make it till morning, me too. I remember that night perfectly, I was recalling all the good things. And only that, for everything, all the most wonderful things. At that time we spent time together with other people. Laughter is the most valuable thing. Everything else, whatever she or you have, you can't take it anywhere, because it won't help you at all. Well, of course, we need to take care of our well-being, because in our old age, our children won't take care of us. The current generation needs to understand that we will support our parents, but the next generation won't feel obligated to help their parents make ends meet. That's why we need to think about securing our old age. What about you? But here is where there's hope for artificial intelligence. Did you know?
I want your opinion on artificial intelligence. I have two opposing views. Some say it's our future, others say it's unemployment, that it's our new enemy and a new kind that will one day break free. When we entrust it with nuclear weapons, when we entrust it with managing factories. Like in Terminator, remember James Cameron, the movie will just rise up.
I wrote an entire book called The Fourth World War, and I talk about all the scenarios of how artificial intelligence, will enter our lives. When I wrote it in 2019, everyone was giggling, saying, what's he talking about? Where is this going? And so on. It was awkward for me to explain to people that they were naive idiots. Also, after we got a much more powerful human-level intelligence, it was Deep Blue who defeated Kasparov. Then we got the International Business Machines Watson computer, which beat a human in jeopardy in its own game, meaning it was able to extract meanings. Third, it was AlphaGo, which helped us win in strategy. I wrote an article. I remember this. It was humanity's last battle in Seoul. How funny that we ended up there. And that's exactly where AlphaGo defeated the Korean Grandmaster. So it was clear that we had already crossed over, and we are simply science now. It's kind of just a little bit sort of faster than practical implementation, but if we see that practical implementation already exists and everything is resolved, then that's it. But the last ones, all of them. It is believed that 2024 will become fundamentally pivotal. So basically, by showing the video, for the first time at a presentation of this level, a person leading such a company came out and said, well, my partners are Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. You have to be able to read the signals. So basically, we really got this chip that is capable of performing calculations that, well, sort of close the gap that we have.
The largest is about fist-sized, costs $40,000 and is unique.
But, as he joked, on this hand I have 10 billion and this one has 5.
He mentioned an astronomical amount.
But what he meant was the research itself. Yes, so it will cost less. But what's important is not how it looks and so on, but simply its capabilities. They really are, well, revolutionary. It will inevitably burn out.
What they once meant.
Then a whole series of questions arises. So the first question is about borders, digital borders, which we are now going to face. You see, all these things are a threat to national security, financial security, to anyone's security. But if someone suddenly invents a quantum computer somewhere, it will take away everyone's money in a day simply because everything will go wrong. Well, because quantum computing means that the speed of cracking a cipher is such that no cipher can withstand it. All banks will be hacked at once, everything, so to speak.
All bitcoins
will instantly become everything in a second. Well, that's a kind of fantastic scenario, but you have to understand that these are very high risks, especially considering the overall geopolitical situation that we all find ourselves in. The internet network has grown, technologies have developed, but we are increasingly, so to speak, spreading apart in this geopolitical space to different poles. That is,
it turns out all these arms races, some with drones, others with tanks, make no sense. Ultimately, the person who builds the best computer may win.
I wouldn't say that for sure. Why? Because all these things are controlled by artificial intelligence. If his artificial intelligence doesn't have drones, then it can't do anything.
That is, it needs hands?
And if it has drones, then it can do God knows what, and no one will be able to catch or stop it, and so on. And that's where we are now. What I was talking about, the perfect storm. 3 dramatic factors have come together for us. The first one, the first is ideological and political. We are splitting into different civilizational enclaves, as they are called. The second is that artificial intelligence has surpassed humans in intellectual ability. And the third is that people themselves have stopped understanding what is happening. Because the information environment is now unreliable, you can't really know public opinion or what's happening anymore. It's impossible to find out. So, this system has lost its ability to manage things through certain elements that would bring the field of meanings into some kind of order. There's nothing like that anymore. We are in a perfect storm. So, in any circumstances, anything can happen to you. Any small thing can have completely unimaginable consequences. You know what they say about chaos too. A butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon Valley, and a hurricane happens in New York. That's about us.
Money and fame spoil people, that's what many people think and say. Personally, I think it's a catalyst for what's inside a person. If you're a bad person on the inside, then maybe it will spoil you. If you're truly a good and strong person, then probably, yes, there's an exception here. It probably won't spoil you. How wrong am I?
There is a problem. People think that their people are being corrupted. Well, those who don't have fame and money think that those who do have fame and money have been corrupted by fame and money. But it's just different, that's all. I've consulted people from the top 10 of the Forbes list. They changed all the time, but whoever I saw among them, I have to tell you, everyone looks at them as just a bag of money. But it's just a person, he has a soul, a life, feelings, and so on. But think about it. How do you feel when someone comes in, who's somewhere up there, close to the Forbes list? Everyone around them, you see, it doesn't matter if it's a security guard, a wife, a son. For them, your place on the Forbes list is the first thing. It's all about money. It's disgusting. Then everyone thinks that if it says someone has a certain number of billions, that money is just lying around in their pockets.
And they don't understand
That it's an estimate of assets, which is market-based, which constantly goes up and down, which are invested, mortgaged, and refinanced. It's all a mess. But of course, it's clear that he's a wealthier person, and someone comes to him and says, listen, it's just a matter of 2 million. We're doing something so beautiful and useful for people. Are you crazy? Just go away. I won't spend a single penny on you. Well, of course, money has spoiled him. Of course, he didn't stand up for Jeanne. Words, words, and what's even worse is that words are a construct that inevitably leads to hatred. And living with this feeling that someone constantly doesn't like you, that's a very heavy burden, and not many people can endure it.
because the more people know you, the more people among them might not like you. Of course, yesterday I checked my direct messages. I had a huge number of messages there. I don't read them, just like I don't read all the comments on YouTube. It's impossible. Otherwise, I would just have to quit everything and stop doing anything. And he writes, you really are a bastard, just like everyone else. I'm writing to you. I bought your vitamins 2 months ago, and you don't even read my messages, yet you tell everyone that you're a good person. So I even recorded an audio message for him. I said, listen, you're a very narrow-minded person. Just imagine, put yourself in my shoes. It's impossible. I mean, the person...
He can't switch places or he'd be in your position. And he's writing you comments. You see, that's just how it is. You can't judge anything by the comments. Less than 3% of people usually leave comments.
By the way, it's like restaurant reviews. When you go, you either see a 5-star or a 1-star review because people leave feedback only when they're super satisfied or when it's just terrible.
They came up to him and asked him to leave a review, and they watched how he rated it. In that case, you'll always give a 5. That's why, as I said, we're influenced by life circumstances, not just by what we think, Proslav. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Downhill. I don't know, I just know all the old stars, the really great ones, but most of them are already gone. Of course, old age was extremely hard for most of them, because on the one hand, they lived in a completely different reality. And when they started to lose their strength, beauty, and so on, each person experienced it in their own way. Some tried to put on a brave face, others did something else. Understand that you're taking on a burden now. And then there are those wonderful people who sang one good song, well, not good, but that overplayed Epsy Hammer.
For example, yes, we have...
As many people here as you want.
Of one song.
A one-hit wonder. There I will kiss the sand you walked on. Well, we just remember he's no longer alive. But this is what the person lived with. Like, he comes in, they tell him to kiss the sand you walked on, like Larochka. Guziv just hates it. And in the end, I will say, goodbye, don't promise to love. You see, but she just takes 3 counts about Yuga. And this one, like you, but it's all the time, well, such a famous joke, like you, Ranevskaya Mulia, don't annoy me, to say, Akhmatova, I can't do this anymore.
She was a great actress.
Before the mat rock, no one can forgive my hands. Under a dark veil, at all times a structure would arise. Get ready. They started labeling you with this nonsense, and you became kind of less than this nonsense, and you have to live with it. But it's a funny nightmare. They are unhappy, they can be angry. Yeah. And what's with him wherever you go? And finally. I would have killed that one, but she is a heroic person.
Teach me how to put people in their place. Well,
It's completely pointless. Why? Well,
I feel uncomfortable. He invades my personal space or talks about some intimate things, and I feel uncomfortable. How do I stop him so that he doesn't bring up this issue a second time?
the best way is an aggressive weapon like shooting him right in the knee, but he still might come back. A chain over the head, but threads, but it's impossible. Nothing, well, I mean, we can of course try them there.
Sitting here now, I realize Andre is right. You must stay calm and act differently with people like that.
But if someone upsets you, offends you, or something else, yeah, allow yourself to be offended. Yeah, to hell with it. But just don't carry it with you, like my loved ones. There's this parable about two monks who were traveling. They weren't even allowed to look at a woman. So one was young, one was old, and they were walking. And there was a river, and a naked girl was standing there and said, "Carry me to the other side." The young one turned away, embarrassed, but the old one picked her up and carried her across. They kept walking. An hour passed, 2 hours, and the young one couldn't take it anymore. How could you? How could you? I just don't understand," the young one said. And the old one replied, "Listen, I carried her across and left her there, but you're still carrying her with you." So we can get angry because we're living people. That's our biology. Our primary reactions are biological. We can't change our biology, and we won't walk around with glowing halos over our heads. What's important is what we do afterwards. If you hit any person with a neurological hammer, they'll have a reflex. It's normal. We have biological reactions, and that's fine. The real question is what we do with that, what place we give it in our lives. So don't scold yourself if you're not perfect somewhere, but definitely don't turn it into some kind of rule. Yes, where's yours? You got angry, but you generally prefer not to be and would rather reach an agreement. If it didn't work out and you hit someone, well, it happened. What can you do?
The leg resists being human.
But neither do we.
Idealizes everyone, including you, because we're all human.
That's what we are. We are human, and being human means being weak. So, envious, well, damn it, not the best creature.
It's like, you know what questions I want to ask. Actually, I have a question about envy, by the way, the one in which... Okay, but people talk about white envy. What is that? Like, I look at a person and think, good for him, he's successful, he achieved something, but I never have that. Ah, you scoundrel, you must be someone's son or something. I always think about what qualities led him to that. I need to develop those qualities to achieve things too. But why do I want this? What's the purpose? Does white envy even exist?
It seems to me that this is what envy is, and envy is absolutely natural. It's part of our biological history.
Not bad.
Well, it's not ideological, it's physiological. But for some people, it becomes a way of self-identification. Yes, when I say that only those who are lucky achieve success, well, that's just shooting yourself in the foot. At the same time, I can definitely say from all the young people I know who inherited huge amounts of money, companies, and so on, but in 99 out of 100 cases, it's a curse. I mean, everything else is just something else entirely. You simply can't inherit your parents' skills. You can't inherit talent. Children of talented people don't inherit talent. They're always under pressure, under stress. That's also a terrible thing. This is just about the issue of idealization. There's money, fame, and more. But if we're talking about envy, you just shouldn't let it grow inside you. Well, if you feel envious about something, it happens, maybe. But when you start drawing conclusions from it, you usually end up shooting yourself in the foot. So why do it? So It's often not even envy. It's a feeling of some kind of inner inferiority in a person, as they say. That's why they suffer. And that's why they try to escape that suffering by putting someone else down. You see, that's how he elevates himself, by saying we're not like that. He's trying to heal himself, but it's a bad remedy.
You have consulted and are consulting many well-known wealthy people, and you have a lot of experience communicating with oligarchs. So tell me, what exactly distinguishes a financially successful person from an unsuccessful one in terms of mindset? So, for example, he always dreamed of being rich, a successful businessman, making a huge fortune, but it didn't work out. Or on the contrary, he never wanted to achieve anything. He just works as a plumber. What's the main difference between these people?
I'll tell you a secret.
All right, turn off the camera.
I work in the field of thinking methodology. So I uploaded all my books on thinking into this G5 chat. And I asked, what does Kurpatov think about thinking? And I have an hour until 5. It replies that Kurpatov thinks real thinking is when, as a result of your intellectual activity, something changes in reality. Very smart, really. But the truth is that successful people are those who, what about thinking? It is constantly connected to something objectively actually existing. It doesn't matter if it's material objects, laws of nature, understanding interpersonal relationships, and so on. These are people who can feel what's really happening at their fingertips. They're not lost in illusions. They can be visionaries. Well, that's always the case. If you listen to how Musk explains how he came to one decision or another, he'll show everything with his hands, what was happening. He constantly has a direct, immediate sense that this is real, that it exists. There's not a second of doubt. That's what works. In this sense, I always really like surgeons because for them, everything is always clear. I would have become a surgeon too. Unfortunately, my dad turned out to be a psychiatrist, so I didn't become one. When I was a child, I wasn't even 6 years old yet, and they asked me, who do you want to be? I said, like Grandpa, a boss, like a girl. No, not like a girl. He was a general in the medical service of the Northern Fleet Medical Service. I said, what are there? And then they told me, a 6-year-old child. We have an uncle who's a urologist, an uncle who's a neurologist, an aunt who's a pathologist, and a grandmother who's a physiotherapist. Well, I didn't know any of the professions. I asked, Dad, who did they say I should be? A psychiatrist. I said it with sadness. I asked, so like Dad? Since then, I've been carrying this red cross.
But what is the right attitude toward money, not just for rich people, but in general?
Well, it's hard for me. It's hard for me to talk about that.
So, you must earn a good salary with that attitude toward money.
I'm definitely not complaining, but I had my time.
People like that rarely complain. When you do what you love, money follows, so you never work just for money, but it always shows up.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but how else? Because what I do doesn't really sell what I do. Well, for example, I systematize something and prepare a scientific paper. No one will ever pay me for that. They'll just criticize me, and that's it. But as a result of what I came up with, I can make something out of it that will be useful to people, and they will use it. And that's why actually the income comes from, well, not from what I'm interested in. Unfortunately, I don't get paid for what interests me, and I'm afraid that's the rule. Well, because when you're interested in something, you have to pay for it.
You want to get paid for pleasure too, right?
That's a different job. Everyone got it mixed up. But when I was still a cadet, my salary was 80 rubles. Well, it fluctuated, but back then I had 80 rubles, and I would split those 80 rubles. I gave 40 to my mom for cooking, for food, and the other 40. I had to choose books. I would go to the bookstore, stand there with 40 rubles, and pick which book to buy, which book not to buy, and which one would still be there next time. So that when I could come back, I thought, When I can walk in and buy a book without thinking about how much it costs, I'll be the happiest person alive. And now, every time they bring me these books home by the kilogram, I'm constantly expanding my living space just so I can have them in the right combinations. So yes, I always remind myself, you're the happiest person, die, love, all yours.
I probably want some advice from you on how to stop thinking about a bad outcome in the future. When I start something, I constantly worry sometimes that something won't work out. I understand that it's normal, that it should be this way, but what should you do in those cases when you keep thinking that something bad will definitely happen, that something will go wrong? It happens, well,
I would say here, of course, if you've taken it on, then you'll keep fighting. And you're not the kind to give up, even if, as they say, everything goes down the drain. Well, that's just how it was.
I worry, but I keep moving forward and never back down.
Well, that's it. I'm telling you now an internal instruction, something you can tell yourself. You started to worry and you ask yourself, am I going to cheat somewhere? Am I going to do something else? Will I not get hit? Will I be guaranteed to win? No, you go all in and move forward. That's because it's always the idea that there's an option to do things differently. As long as there are alternatives, you remove the alternatives. While you're choosing, you worry, you're afraid to lose. But once, as you said, everything is done, the bet is made, just do it. That's it. You're done.
Probably the final question. If you had the opportunity to ask, for example, Mr. Musk, because he's now announcing something new at Aerolink, what question would that be? What would you like to know?
In what aspect?
Well, is there something you want to ask him? Let's say you have a one-on-one conversation.
I feel very sorry for him. I would like to talk to him about himself. He's struggling.
And why?
Because he has an incredible amount of responsibility on him.
He's under global scrutiny.
Yes. He has made huge risky bets, many of which may not work out. And they could be fatal for him. Musk is the kind of business that could fall apart, just like Microsoft. Not the business, but Musk himself. Maybe he's actually taking huge risks all the time, and on top of that, he just has some psychological traits. He's not good at communicating with people. He has Asperger's in one form or another, and he's definitely depressive, I mean, just biologically.
More numbers. Sun is a great man. In terms of what he's trying to do, that's normal. We all feel happy to do something we can actually touch today, but that's just a small part. I'm really interested in the fact that he's trying to go toward Mars. Most likely he won't see most of what he's working toward in his lifetime. Colonization too.
Actually, in my opinion, the idea with Mars was a marketing move because he needed to convince people to invest huge amounts of money in a technology that, well, exactly. Well, he just needed to create that kind of special hype. He already went through that before with Tesla, specifically creating hype around the idea that it's an eco-friendly car and that it's a different approach to ecology. That's what allowed him to succeed with Mars as well. Basically, it's exactly the same story. I don't think he's that romantic. Well, he creates and tries to shape this image of a visionary and so on. Obviously, he's constantly solving very practical, very realistic things, and that's exactly why he wins. Not because he has beautiful ideas. There's a cent of 50, well, let's say with Neuralink. He, of course, in my opinion, with Neuralink, just doesn't understand because of his specific kind of autism that he has. I think he doesn't understand that the brain is a machine, but not the kind he thinks it is. And of course, Neuralink will essentially be limited to the motor cortex in one form or another.
And what advice would you give him?
Well, I would talk to him about it because I feel like he needs help that I could provide. Well, I think it's not just the motor cortex, but also the visual cortex, because now they're even restoring vision. But that was already everything, and Damascus is just very good. The technology of these electrodes themselves is very good. They restored vision, which I covered in my 2019 book, This is Research. People were already driving cars using a video camera linked to the visual cortex before that. Well, we have a set. We have the associative cortex, and then there's the rest of the cortex. All the rest of the cortex, which is not associative, can be reproduced, but in the associative one, that's where our thoughts, our memories, our joys, our sorrows are, and there's no way to emulate that.
As a farewell,
Thank you.
really, thank you for the amazing conversation. I would like you to give our viewers some advice as a farewell, something motivating.
So I was criticized for a long time for being pessimistic about everything. I discussed informational pseudo-imbecility, digital autism, institutional collapse, and the Fourth World War. Everyone kept criticizing me, and when what I said started coming true, I came up with a new phrase, and now they don't criticize me anymore. I've come to terms with it, meaning I've accepted what we are all going through. These are, of course, the most dramatic and, in terms of the scale of change, the most fascinating times. Neither before nor after us will there be people who will witness something like this. We will see the technological singularity, no matter what form it takes. In my opinion, it will come from a very negative front, but it will definitely happen. We still remember another world where there were just people, not intelligent assistants, with whom we will soon be going on dates, making friends, and so on. And in this sense, it's already impossible to stop, but that doesn't mean we should stop doing something. And so, humility comes with the understanding that nothing can be predicted and nothing can be used as a foundation for your future. Just feel the joy from the fact that you can do something that you consider important for yourself right now. And then, in the next world, the new one that we will enter, things will somehow settle and organize themselves there. And this kind of humility, determination, I think, is the most important quality that we should have. That's all. Lepestok.
Wonderful.